The stars had always been silent. For all of human history, people looked up at the night sky and wondered if anyone else was out there. They sent radio signals into the void. They launched probes with golden records attached, hoping someone might find them. They built telescopes and searched for signs of life among distant worlds. But the universe never answered. Until now. High Admiral Keth Voran stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and looked at the small blue planet rotating slowly in the distance. His 4 eyes studied it with the same expression he had worn when viewing hundreds of other worlds. Mild curiosity, complete confidence, the certainty of a predator watching prey that did not yet know it was being hunted. "Status report," he said. His voice was calm and cold, like wind moving through an empty cave. "All 3,000 ships are in position, High Admiral," responded his second-in-command, Fleet Commander Yethris. She was tall even by Velthari standards, her gray skin marked with the ceremonial scars of 50 successful conquests. "The primitive species has detected our presence. Their communication networks are active." Keth Voran made a small sound of acknowledgement. This was always the same. The moment of discovery, the panic, the desperate attempts to understand what was happening. He had witnessed it so many times that it no longer interested him. The Velthari Dominion had ruled the galaxy for over 12,000 years. They had conquered more than 400 species across 12 star systems. Some of those species still existed, serving the Dominion as workers and soldiers. Others had chosen to resist and had been erased from existence. Their worlds were now mining colonies or military bases. Their names were forgotten. This was the natural order of things. The strong ruled, the weak served, and those who refused to accept their place were eliminated. "Begin the standard broadcast," Keth Voran ordered. "Let them know their options." The communications officer, a young Velthari named Drethan, activated the translation systems. The Dominion had encountered enough species to develop technology that could decode and translate almost any language within hours. Human languages had been simple to crack. The species had been broadcasting radio signals into space for over a century. They had practically given the Velthari a complete guide to their communication systems. The message went out on every frequency, in every major human language. It was the same message the Dominion had sent to countless worlds before. "Attention, inhabitants of the third planet. This is High Admiral Keth Voran of the Velthari Dominion. Your world has been selected for incorporation into our empire. You have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. All military forces must stand down. All governments must transfer authority to Dominion administrators. All weapons must be surrendered. Compliance will be rewarded with survival. Your species will be permitted to continue existing under Dominion rule. Resistance will result in planetary extinction. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is your only warning. 72 hours. Choose wisely." Keth Voran watched the blue planet as his words traveled toward it at the speed of light. In a few minutes, every human on that world would know that their existence now hung by a thread. Most species reacted with immediate panic. Governments collapsed. Populations fled in random directions, as if there was anywhere to run. Leaders begged for mercy or tried to negotiate. Some attempted to fight, launching primitive weapons that the Dominion fleet destroyed without effort. A few species, the proud ones, declared that they would never surrender. They gave speeches about freedom and dignity. They rallied their people to resist, and then they died, their worlds burning, their civilizations reduced to ashes and memory. Keth Voran wondered which type these humans would be. Not that it mattered. The result was always the same. The minutes passed. The message reached Earth. And then something unexpected happened. Nothing. Keth Voran waited for the chaos to begin. He waited for the panicked transmissions, the desperate pleas, the threats and the prayers. But the human communication networks remained strangely calm. "Report," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. Drethan worked his console, his young face showing confusion. "High Admiral, they have received the message. We can confirm it was broadcast globally, but there is no significant change in their communication patterns." "Explain." "There is discussion, certainly. Government channels have become active. Military frequencies are showing increased traffic. But it is all very organized. There are no signs of panic, no mass evacuations, no breakdown of social order." Drethan paused, checking his readings again as if they might be wrong. They appear to be preparing for something. But their communications suggest calm, methodical planning rather than fear. Fleet Commander Yethris moved closer to her admiral, her voice low. Perhaps they do not understand the threat. Young species sometimes have difficulty accepting the reality of their situation. Keth Voran considered this. It was possible. Many primitive civilizations had never conceived of intelligent life beyond their own world, when faced with evidence that they were not alone, that the universe contained powers far beyond their understanding. Their minds simply refused to accept it. Denial was a common response to extinction. Continue monitoring, he ordered. They will understand soon enough. Hours passed. The Velthari fleet maintained its position at the edge of the human solar system, a wall of ships that blocked out the stars. Each vessel was a masterwork of 12,000 years of military engineering. Their weapons could crack planets. Their shields could withstand nuclear explosions. Their soldiers had conquered species that had achieved space travel, species that had built empires of their own. Humans had none of these things. Their most advanced spacecraft were barely capable of reaching their own moon. They had no shields, no energy weapons, no faster-than-light travel. By any reasonable measure, they were primitives, insects compared to the Velthari. And yet, as the hours ticked by, Keth Voran found himself growing curious. The human response was not what he expected. There was no surrender, but there was also no defiance. No panicked leaders appeared on their broadcast networks to rally resistance. No military forces launched futile attacks against the Dominion fleet. Instead, there was only silence from their governments and a strange, focused activity across their military channels. High Admiral, Drethon reported, we are detecting significant movement at several human military installations. Underground facilities are being activated. Communications suggest they are moving equipment and personnel, but we cannot determine the purpose. Weapons deployment, Yethris suggested. They may be preparing to fight. With what? Keth Voran responded. Their most powerful weapons are crude nuclear devices. We have detected their arsenals. A few thousand warheads at most. Our shields could withstand 10 times that number. Then what are they doing? Keth Voran did not answer. He simply watched the blue planet and waited. In his long career, he had learned that understanding an enemy often mattered more than simply destroying them. Not because it changed the outcome, but because it made the process more efficient. The Dominion did not conquer through brute force alone. They conquered through understanding. They studied each species, learned their weaknesses, and exploited them. Fear was usually enough. Most species valued survival above all else. When faced with certain destruction, they chose submission. But occasionally, the Dominion encountered species that did not respond to fear in normal ways. Species that had been forged by violence and hardship. Species that had survived extinction events, planetary disasters, or devastating internal conflicts. These species were always more difficult, not because they were stronger, but because they were unpredictable. Their responses did not follow logical patterns. They made choices that seemed irrational, even self-destructive. Keth Voran had destroyed such species before. It simply required more force and less subtlety. 48 hours remained on the ultimatum. Still no response from the human governments. Still no surrender, no negotiation, no resistance. Just silence and that strange, purposeful activity. High Admiral, Drethon said, his voice carrying an unusual note. I am detecting something else. Human information networks are showing increased activity around historical archives, military databases, scientific records. It appears that civilians across the planet are accessing and sharing historical documents. What kind of documents? War records, High Admiral. They are sharing information about their past conflicts. Images, videos, technical specifications. It is spreading rapidly through their global communication networks. Yethris made a dismissive sound. Propaganda. They are trying to convince themselves they can resist. But Keth Voran was no longer so certain. He had conquered species that tried to use propaganda to boost morale. This did not feel like that. There was no accompanying rhetoric, no calls to arms, no patriotic speeches. Just data. Raw, historical data. As if the humans wanted the Velthari to see it. Download everything they are sharing, Keth Voran ordered. Begin a full analysis of their military history and capabilities. I want to know everything about how this species fights. Is that necessary, High Admiral? Yethries asked. They are primitives. Surely our standard tactics will be sufficient. Kethvaran turned his four eyes toward his second-in-command. In all his years of conquest, he had learned one truth above all others. The moment you assumed victory was the moment you became vulnerable. It is always necessary to understand your enemy, he said. Begin the analysis. In the vast data centers of the Velthari flagship, artificial intelligences began processing thousands of years of human history. They absorbed images and text, videos and audio recordings, technical documents, and personal accounts. They built models and drew conclusions, and slowly, a picture began to form. A picture that would make even the ancient Velthari dominion hesitate. But that was still to come. For now, the fleet waited, and the countdown continued. 48 hours, then 24, then 12, and still, Earth remained silent. On the blue planet below, humans went about their lives. Children went to school, people went to work, families ate dinner together and talked about ordinary things. But beneath that surface of normality, something else was happening. Deep underground, in bunkers that had been built during a conflict called the Cold War, military officers studied the alien fleet and made calculations. In laboratories around the world, scientists analyzed the limited data they had collected and began working on countermeasures. In government buildings, leaders held meetings that would never be recorded, making decisions that would never be made public. Humanity had spent its entire existence preparing for threats. They had fought each other with every weapon they could create. They had developed technology specifically designed to end civilizations. They had stared into the abyss of extinction and had not blinked. Now, for the first time, the threat came from beyond their world. And humanity did not panic. They prepared. In the silence between Earth and the Velthari fleet, something was building. A response that had been 12,000 years in the making. A message that would change everything. But the Velthari did not know this yet. They saw only a primitive world, a simple conquest. Another species to add to their collection. They had no idea what was coming. Kethvaran stood on his bridge, watching the blue planet rotate slowly in the darkness of space. He had destroyed hundreds of worlds. He had ended civilizations that had existed for millennia. He had never known defeat. But as he watched Earth, waiting for its response, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Curiosity. What kind of species did not panic when facing extinction? What kind of civilization remained calm in the face of annihilation? What were these humans preparing? He would find out soon enough. The countdown continued. 40 hours, 30, 20, and Earth remained silent, waiting. Senior analyst Frithani had served the Velthari Intelligence Division for over 200 years. In that time, she had studied more than 60 species scheduled for conquest. She had learned their languages, mapped their societies, identified their weaknesses, and provided the information that allowed the Dominion to crush them with maximum efficiency and minimum cost. She was very good at her job. She had received 17 commendations and had been personally praised by High Admiral Kethvaran himself. Her analyses had saved Velthari lives and shortened countless campaigns. But as she sat in her research chamber aboard the Eternal Dominion, reviewing the data that had been downloaded from human networks, she felt something she had not experienced since her earliest days as a young analyst. Unease. It had started with the basic historical overview. Every species had conflicts in their past. This was natural. Competition for resources, territorial disputes, ideological differences. The Velthari themselves had fought wars before they unified under the Dominion. Conflict was simply part of how civilizations developed. But humans were different. Frithani had never seen a species that devoted so much of their existence to fighting each other. Their entire history was a continuous sequence of wars. Large wars, small wars, wars that lasted for years, wars that lasted for centuries. Wars over land, wars over resources, wars over ideas, wars over the color of their skin, or the way they worshipped their gods. She began with what humans called the ancient period. Empires rising and falling, armies of hundreds of thousands clashing on battlefields, cities burned to the ground, populations enslaved or massacred. The scale was impressive for a species so young, but it was the modern era that truly caught her attention. In the early 20th century, humans had fought something they called the First World War. Frithani reviewed the data with growing disbelief. Tens of millions dead, New weapons designed specifically to kill humans more efficiently. Poison gases that melted lungs. Machines that threw metal at incredible speeds. Explosives that could destroy entire buildings. And then, barely 20 years later, they did it again. The Second World War was even worse. 60 million dead. Entire cities flattened by fire. Industrial systems designed not to create goods, but to create death. Factories that produced nothing but weapons, running day and night, year after year. And at the end of this war, humans had created something new. Nuclear weapons. Vrithani studied the images carefully. The mushroom clouds rising over human cities. The shadows of people burned into walls by the heat of the blast. The radiation that poisoned the land for generations. These weapons were crude by Velthari standards, but they were still capable of destroying cities in an instant. The humans had used them on each other, not once, but twice, within days of each other. They had destroyed 2 cities and killed hundreds of thousands of their own kind, simply to end a war faster. This was not normal. In all her years of study, Vrithani had never encountered a species that had developed world-ending weapons and then actually used them. Most species that reached that level of technology either unified before such weapons became necessary, or destroyed themselves before they could threaten anyone else. Humans had done neither. They had built the weapons, used them, and then built more. Many more. The period that followed the Second World War was what humans called the Cold War. Vrithani found this name strange at first. The conflict did not seem cold at all. It seemed like the most terrifying thing she had ever studied. 2 human factions, called the United States and the Soviet Union, had divided their world between them, and both had built nuclear arsenals capable of destroying all life on their planet many times over. For nearly 50 years, these 2 factions had pointed thousands of nuclear weapons at each other. Each side knew that if they attacked, the other would respond with equal force. The result would be the extinction of their entire species. And they had accepted this. The humans had a term for it. Mutually assured destruction. They had shortened it to an acronym. MAD. Vrithani thought this was appropriate. Only a mad species would consider such a strategy acceptable, but it had worked. For 50 years, neither side had attacked, because both knew that attack meant annihilation. The humans had achieved peace through the promise of complete and total destruction. Vrithani saved her analysis and moved on to human military technology. What she found there did nothing to calm her growing concern. Chemical weapons. Substances that attacked the nervous system, causing uncontrollable convulsions and death. Gases that blistered skin and destroyed lungs. Agents that caused bleeding from every opening in the body. The humans had developed these weapons, used them in their wars, and then agreed to stop using them because even they found them too horrible. Biological weapons. Diseases created or modified in laboratories to spread faster and kill more efficiently. Viruses and bacteria designed to resist treatment. The humans had built facilities to produce these weapons in quantities large enough to kill billions. Then they had locked them away and sworn never to use them. But they had kept them, just in case. Vrithani found records of military research programs that seemed almost impossible to believe. Programs to develop weapons that could control weather, causing floods and droughts in enemy territory. Programs to create earthquakes and tsunamis. Programs to modify the human brain itself. Creating soldiers who felt no fear or pain. Most of these programs had been abandoned, but the research remained. The knowledge existed, and if threatened, there was nothing stopping the humans from resuming their work. The analyst paused her research and sat back in her chair. Her 4 hands were trembling slightly. She had studied many species, but she had never encountered anything like this. Most civilizations developed weapons to defend themselves from external threats. The Velthari had built their military to conquer other species. It was a tool for expansion, for the glory of the Dominion. But human weapons were different. They had been created not to fight aliens, but to fight other humans. Every horror, every nightmare technology had been designed by humans to be used against humans. They had looked at their own species and asked, how can we kill more of ourselves, more quickly, more terribly? And they had found answers. So many answers. Vrithani began compiling her report. She included the statistics, total deaths in major human conflicts, types of weapons developed, current military capabilities, but statistics alone could not capture what she had discovered. She added something she rarely included in her analyses, a personal observation. This species has never faced an external enemy, she wrote. Every weapon, every strategy, every tactic they possess was developed to fight themselves. They have no experience with alien threats, but they have extensive experience with extinction-level warfare. They have spent their entire existence preparing to destroy themselves. More concerning, they have not done so. Despite possessing the means to end their own civilization multiple times over, they have survived. They have developed deterrence strategies based on the promise of mutual annihilation. They have created weapons too terrible to use, and then kept those weapons ready for the day when using them might become necessary. The humans are not a peaceful species. They are a species that has learned to contain its own violence. They are a loaded weapon that has not yet been fired. I recommend extreme caution in any engagement with this species. They may be technologically primitive by Dominion standards, but they have demonstrated a willingness to accept destruction that I have never encountered in any other civilization. Standard subjugation tactics assume that the target species will choose survival over annihilation. I am not confident this assumption applies to humans. Vrethani transmitted her report to High Admiral Kethvoran and waited. She expected him to review it quickly. She expected acknowledgement, perhaps questions about specific details. She did not expect what actually happened. Nothing. Hours passed with no response. The countdown to the ultimatum deadline continued. 30 hours, 25, 20. When Kethvoran finally summoned her to the command bridge, Vrethani knew something had changed. She had served under the High Admiral for over a century. She knew his moods, his expressions, the subtle movements of his four eyes that indicated his state of mind. When she entered the bridge, she saw something she had never seen before. Doubt. Your report was thorough, Kethvoran said. He stood before the main viewing screen, watching Earth rotate slowly in the distance. Perhaps too thorough. I showed it to my senior officers. Some of them found it disturbing. I reported only what I found, High Admiral. Yes, I know. He turned to face her. Tell me something, analyst. In all your years of service, in all the species you have studied, have you ever encountered anything like this? Vrethani considered the question carefully. No, High Admiral, I have not. Neither have I. Kethvoran returned his gaze to the viewing screen. I have conquered species that were more technologically advanced than humans, species with larger populations, greater resources, more sophisticated weapons, but I have never encountered a species that has done to itself what humans have done. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. Do you know what disturbs me most about your report? It is not the weapons. We have weapons that can match or exceed anything they possess. It is not their history of violence. Many species have violent histories. It is the way they think about conflict. High Admiral, they have a concept they call total war. It means war without limits. War where the goal is not victory, but the complete destruction of the enemy, their cities, their infrastructure, their population, everything. They have practiced this against each other. They have developed strategies and doctrines specifically designed to destroy entire civilizations. Kethvoran turned back to Vrethani, and they have never lost a total war. In their entire history, whenever they have committed to the complete destruction of an enemy, they have achieved it. They do not surrender. They do not compromise. They fight until one side or the other no longer exists. Vrethani said nothing. There was nothing to say. The Dominion conquers through fear. Kethvoran continued. We present species with a simple choice: submission or extinction. Most species choose submission because they value survival above all else. But humans, he paused, humans have repeatedly chosen extinction over submission. Their history proves it. They have watched their cities burn, their populations die, their civilizations crumble, and they have refused to surrender. They have preferred destruction to defeat. What are your orders, High Admiral? Kethvoran was silent for a long moment. Outside the viewing screen, Earth continued its slow rotation. Blue and green and white. Beautiful and fragile. We continue as planned, he said finally. The ultimatum stands. If they surrender, we accept. If they resist, we destroy them. That is the Dominion way. That has always been the Dominion way. But Vrethani heard something in his voice. A hesitation that had not been there before. However, Kethvoran added, I want you to continue your research. Learn everything you can about this species. their military capabilities, their weapons, their psychology. If we must destroy them, I want to know exactly what we are destroying, and why they refuse to be saved. Vrithani bowed and returned to her research chamber. The countdown continued. 15 hours, 12, 10, and somewhere on Earth, in bunkers and laboratories and government buildings around the world, humanity was preparing its response. Not a surrender, not a plea for mercy, not a futile gesture of defiance. Something else entirely. In her chamber, Vrithani continued her analysis. She studied human psychology, their capacity for violence, their strange ability to combine brutality with compassion. She learned about their art and their literature, their dreams and their nightmares, and slowly, she began to understand something that terrified her. The Velthari were conquerors. They destroyed species that resisted and enslaved species that submitted. It was efficient. It was logical. It was the natural order of things. But humans did not see the universe that way. They did not divide existence into conquerors and conquered, into masters and slaves. They saw survival as a competition, yes, but also as a collaboration. They fought each other, but they also helped each other. They built weapons of mass destruction, but they also built hospitals and schools and works of art. They were not predictable. They did not follow logical patterns. They made choices that seemed irrational, even self-destructive, and somehow turned those choices into advantages. And they had never, not once in their entire history, surrendered to an enemy who demanded their complete submission. Vrithani finished her expanded analysis and sent it to the High Admiral. Then she sat in her chamber and waited. 8 hours remained on the ultimatum, and Earth was still silent. 12 hours remained on the ultimatum when Earth finally responded. Communications Officer Drethan was the first to notice the incoming transmission. He had been monitoring human channels for over 60 hours, watching their calm, methodical preparations without understanding what they were preparing for. He had seen military frequencies activate around the world, governments holding meetings, populations going about their daily lives with a composure that seemed impossible under the circumstances. And now, finally, a message was being directed at the Velthari fleet. "High Admiral," Drethan said, his voice carrying a tension that made Kethvoran turn from the viewing screen immediately. "We are receiving a transmission from Earth. It is directed specifically at us, using our communication frequencies." Kethvoran's 4 eyes narrowed. "They have decoded our communication systems?" "It appears so, High Admiral. The message is encoded in standard Dominion format. They must have analyzed our earlier broadcast and reverse-engineered our protocols." This was concerning. The Dominion used complex encryption that typically took months to break, even with advanced computational systems. The humans had done it in less than 3 days, using technology that the Velthari had considered primitive. "Display the message," Kethvoran ordered. The main viewing screen flickered, and text began to appear. It was written in perfect Velthari script, grammatically correct, properly formatted. Whoever had composed this message had not merely cracked their communication systems, they had learned their language. The message was preceded by a data attachment. Kethvoran noted its size and signaled for it to be analyzed separately. Then he began reading. "To the commander of the Velthari fleet, we have received your ultimatum. We have considered your terms. We have examined your fleet, your weapons, your technology. We decline. You expected fear. You expected panic. You expected a primitive species to fall to its knees and beg for mercy. You were wrong. We are humanity. We have spent our entire existence preparing for threats like you. We just assumed those threats would come from ourselves. Allow us to explain what you are facing. We have over 12,000 nuclear warheads ready for deployment. Our missiles can reach any point in our solar system. Our warheads are designed to penetrate defensive systems and detonate at optimal positions. We have analyzed your shield frequencies from passive scans of your fleet. We know how to bypass them. We have kinetic bombardment platforms in orbit around our planet. These are simple weapons by your standards. Tungsten rods, accelerated to extreme velocities. They carry no explosive payload. They do not need one. The energy of impact is sufficient to destroy anything they strike. We have biological weapons stored in secure facilities around the world. Diseases created in laboratories, designed to spread quickly and resist treatment. We have never used these weapons against each other. We swore we never would. But you are not us. We have chemical weapons, substances that attack the nervous system, that destroy tissue on contact, that make the air itself lethal. We banned these weapons from our wars because even we found them too terrible. For you, we would reconsider. We have facilities capable of producing more weapons, factories that can be converted to military production within weeks, a population willing to work those factories day and night, a species that has spent thousands of years perfecting the art of destruction. But weapons are not what makes us dangerous. What makes us dangerous is that we are willing to use them. All of them. Without hesitation. Without mercy. Without concern for our own survival. You have offered us a choice between submission and extinction. This is not a choice we recognize. Submission is extinction. It is simply extinction with extra steps. If we surrender, we cease to be what we are. We become slaves, servants, tools for your empire. Our children grow up under your rule, knowing nothing else. Our culture disappears. Our identity is erased. We prefer the other option. You think this makes us irrational? You think we are failing to see the logical choice? You are wrong. We see the logic perfectly. We simply reject it. We have studied your history, what little we could piece together from your broadcasts. You have conquered over 400 species. You have destroyed those who resisted. You have enslaved those who submitted. But you have never encountered us. We are a species forged in fire. We have survived ice ages and plagues, famines and floods. We have killed each other by the millions in wars that lasted decades. We have built weapons capable of ending all life on our planet, and we have kept those weapons pointed at each other for generations. And we are still here. Do you know what that means? It means we are survivors. It means we know how to endure. It means we know how to fight when fighting seems hopeless. You come to our world with 3,000 ships and demand our surrender. We look at those ships and see targets. You threaten us with annihilation. We have lived with the threat of annihilation for so long that it has become background noise. Your ultimatum is not frightening. It is familiar. You expect us to behave like the other species you have conquered, to calculate the odds, to recognize our inferiority, to accept the inevitable and submit. You do not understand us at all. We are the species that charges into certain death rather than retreat. We are the species that plants flags on hills we cannot hold, that fights to the last soldier, that destroys our own ships to prevent their capture. We have a word for it: sacrifice. It means accepting personal destruction for a greater purpose. Your other conquests surrendered because they wanted to survive. We do not measure value in survival alone. We measure value in how we live and how we die. A humanity that submits to your rule is not a humanity worth preserving. So here is our response to your ultimatum. Come, bring your 3,000 ships. Bring your advanced weapons and your superior technology. Bring everything you have. We will meet you. We will fight you. And when the fighting is done, one of two things will have happened. Either you will have destroyed us completely, and we will be gone from the universe, but we will have gone as ourselves, as humans, free and unbroken. Or we will have destroyed you, and your great dominion will learn that there are some species that cannot be conquered, some worlds that cost more to take than they are worth, some prey that bites back. We do not expect to win. We are not fools. We know the odds. We know your capabilities exceed ours in almost every measure. But we also know something you do not seem to understand. Victory is not the only form of success. Sometimes, success is making your enemy pay so dearly for their victory that they question whether it was worth achieving. Sometimes, success is proving that you cannot be broken, even if you can be destroyed. Sometimes, success is becoming the warning that echoes through history, the example that makes the next would-be conqueror hesitate. We intend to be that warning. If you destroy Earth, you will lose ships, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. You will lose soldiers. Your fleet will be weakened, and others will notice. The species you have conquered will hear about the little blue planet that refused to kneel. They will hear about the cost we extracted. They will begin to wonder if maybe, just maybe, resistance is possible. You cannot afford to destroy us, and we will not permit you to conquer us. This leaves you with one option: leave, go back to your empire and mark our system as forbidden territory. Tell your leaders that you found a species too dangerous to engage, too stubborn to threaten. too mad to reason with. We will not pursue you. We have no interest in conquering others. We have enough trouble managing ourselves. We simply wish to be left alone, to continue our existence as we see fit, to fight our own battles and solve our own problems. But if you do not leave, if you proceed with your attack, then know this. We have uploaded targeting data to our weapons systems. Every ship in your fleet has been assigned multiple warheads. Your flagship has been assigned 72. We have calculated trajectories, analyzed shield frequencies, identified vulnerable points. The moment you fire on Earth, we fire on you. Everything we have, every weapon, every missile, every desperate measure we can deploy. We will not hold back. We will not negotiate. We will not stop until one side or the other is completely destroyed. You came here expecting prey. You found predators. You came here expecting fear. You found a species that has lived with fear so long it has become a friend. You came here expecting surrender. You found humans. We are not going to submit. We are not going to run. We are not going to hide. We are going to fight. 12 hours remain on your ultimatum. Use them wisely. When the clock reaches 0, we will be ready. Will you? The message ended. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion was silent. High Admiral Kethvoran stood before the viewing screen, his 4 eyes fixed on the text that still glowed there. Behind him, his officers waited for orders, for some response to what they had just read. None came. Kethvoran was thinking. He was remembering every conquest he had ever commanded, every species that had faced the Dominion ultimatum. He was remembering their responses. The panic, the pleas, the defiance that crumbled when the first weapons fired. This was different. High Admiral, Fleet Commander Yethries said carefully. Surely this is simply bravado. They cannot possibly match their words with action. Our technology is vastly superior. Kethvoran did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned to Drethon. The data attachment. What does it contain? The communications officer had been reviewing the files while the High Admiral read the message. His young face was pale. Technical specifications, High Admiral. Detailed analysis of our shield systems. Targeting solutions for every ship in the fleet. He paused. They are accurate. I do not know how they obtained this information, but their analysis of our defensive capabilities is correct. They have found our weaknesses, Kethvoran said. It was not a question. Yes, High Admiral. They have not merely identified them. They have calculated optimal attack vectors. They know where to strike. The silence on the bridge deepened. Every officer was thinking the same thing. If the humans had analyzed their defenses this thoroughly in less than 72 hours, what else had they done? Kethvoran turned back to the viewing screen. Earth hung there, blue and white and green. Beautiful, fragile, and armed. 11 hours remain, he said quietly. Begin detailed threat assessment. I want to know exactly what they are capable of, and exactly what it will cost us to destroy them. He looked at the message one more time before dismissing it from the screen. And someone find out how they learned our language so quickly. I want to know everything about these humans. The clock continued counting down, and somewhere on Earth, humanity waited. They had said what needed to be said. They had drawn their line. Now they stood behind it, ready to fight, ready to die, ready to make the Velthari regret ever finding their little blue planet. 11 hours. Then 10. Then 9. The message had been delivered. Now came the response. High Admiral Kethvoran had commanded Velthari fleets for over 300 years. He had conquered dozens of worlds, destroyed civilizations that had existed for millennia, and never once hesitated in his duty to the Dominion. His reputation was built on cold certainty, on the absolute confidence that came from knowing he represented the greatest military power in the known galaxy. Now, for the first time in his long career, he called a war council not to plan an attack, but to discuss whether an attack should happen at all. The senior officers of the Eternal Dominion gathered in the strategic chamber, a circular room dominated by holographic displays showing the positions of every ship in the fleet and detailed scans of the human solar system. Kethvoran stood at the center, his 4 eyes moving from one officer to another as they took their positions. You have all read the human message, he began. You have reviewed the intelligence reports from analyst Vrithani. You have seen their targeting data. I have called this council to discuss our options. Fleet Commander Yethries spoke first, as was her right as second in command. High Admiral, Our options remain unchanged. We have given an ultimatum. If they do not surrender, we destroy them. This is the Dominion way. The Dominion way assumes rational enemies, said Weapons Master Korthax, a veteran of over 200 conquests. His voice was careful, measured. Enemies who will surrender when faced with certain destruction. These humans do not appear to be rational. They are bluffing, Yethris insisted. No species willingly chooses extinction. They are attempting to frighten us into withdrawal. If we show weakness now, word will spread. Other conquered species will be encouraged to resist. Perhaps, said strategic analyst Vrithani from her position at the edge of the council. She had been invited to attend despite her relatively junior rank, a sign of how seriously Keth Voran was taking her reports. But I do not believe they are bluffing. I have studied their history extensively. They have chosen extinction over submission many times before. Against each other, Yethri said dismissively. That is different. Is it? Vrithani activated one of the holographic displays. Images began to appear. Human soldiers charging into gunfire. Ships sailing toward certain destruction. Cities burning while their defenders refused to retreat. This is a human event called the Siege of Leningrad, she explained. For nearly 900 days, human soldiers defended this city against an overwhelming enemy. Over 1 million civilians died. They ate rats, they ate leather, they ate the dead, and they did not surrender. The images shifted. This is called Thermopylae. 300 human warriors stood against an army of over 100,000. They knew they would die. They fought anyway. Their deaths inspired their entire civilization to continue resisting. More images. This is Masada. Nearly 1,000 humans, including women and children, chose to kill themselves rather than be captured by their enemies. This is the Warsaw Ghetto. Humans facing certain extermination chose to fight back with improvised weapons. This is Okinawa. Human soldiers and civilians threw themselves from cliffs rather than be captured. Vrethani turned off the display. These are not isolated incidents. These are patterns. Humans have demonstrated, repeatedly, that they will accept death before submission. Not always, not every human, but enough of them. Enough to make their threats credible. The council was silent. Keth Voran watched his officers' faces, reading the doubt that had begun to creep into their expressions. Let us discuss the practical aspects, he said. Weapons Master. What would be the cost of destroying Earth? Korthax accessed his own displays. Assuming the human threat assessment is accurate, and our intelligence suggests it is, they have over 12,000 nuclear warheads capable of reaching our fleet. Their analysis of our shield frequencies appears correct. Our shields will stop some of these weapons. Not all. He manipulated the display, showing simulations. Estimated losses in a direct assault. Between 800 and 1,500 ships, depending on how effectively they coordinate their attack. If they employ their kinetic weapons simultaneously, losses could be higher. Potentially, much higher. That is nearly half our fleet, observed Tactical Commander Methoran, who had been silent until now. Yes, Korthax confirmed. We would win. Of that I have no doubt. But the cost would be significant. The cost would be catastrophic, corrected Admiral Drethvos, commander of the 2nd Battle Group. He was older even than Keth Voran, a living legend who had led the conquest of the Sereth hegemony 50 years earlier. 1,500 ships is not merely a number. It is crews, training, experience, resources that took decades to accumulate. And that is the optimistic estimate. What is the pessimistic estimate? Keth Voran asked. Korthax hesitated. If the humans fight as their history suggests they might, if they employ every weapon they possess without regard for their own survival, if they accept their destruction as the price for damaging us as badly as possible. He paused. We could lose the entire fleet. The silence that followed was absolute. That is impossible, Yethris said, but her voice had lost its confidence. No, Vrethani said quietly. It is not impossible. It is improbable. But the humans have made improbable things happen before. Their entire history is a sequence of improbable survivals. They should have destroyed themselves during their Cold War. They did not. They should have collapsed during their world wars. They did not. They survive. Against all odds, against all reason, they survive, and they make their enemies pay for every victory. Keth Voran added. He had been studying the human historical data himself. unable to stop thinking about what he had seen. The humans have a concept they call a Pyrrhic victory. It refers to a victory that costs so much, it is indistinguishable from defeat. He looked around the council chamber. That is what they are offering us. They know they cannot win. They have said as much. But they are promising to make our victory so costly that it becomes meaningless. Then we accept the cost, Yethris said. But even she sounded uncertain now. We destroy them and move on. And then what? Admiral Drethvos asked. We return to Dominion space with half our fleet missing. The council asks what happened. We tell them that a primitive species, one without faster-than-light travel or energy weapons, destroyed 1,500 of our ships. What do you think happens next? No one answered. They all knew what would happen. The Dominion held its conquered species in check through the perception of overwhelming power. If that perception was damaged, if other species learned that resistance could inflict real harm on their conquerors, the entire structure of the empire could begin to crack. The humans have already won, Vrithani said softly. Not the military victory. They know they cannot achieve that. But they have won something perhaps more important. They have made us afraid. I am not afraid, Yethris snapped. Then you are not paying attention, Vrithani replied. She met the fleet commander's angry gaze without flinching. For the first time in our history, we are facing a species that we cannot conquer without potentially destroying ourselves in the process. That should frighten you. It frightens me. Kethvoran held up a hand to prevent further argument. Enough. The question before this council is simple. Do we proceed with the attack, accepting the potential losses, or do we withdraw and report this system as unconquerable? Withdrawal would be unprecedented, Yethris said. So would losing half our fleet to a primitive species. Kethvoran responded. The council debated for hours. Arguments flew back and forth. Tactical projections were analyzed and reanalyzed. Historical precedents were cited. Contingency plans were proposed and rejected. Through it all, Kethvoran remained largely silent, listening, watching, thinking. He thought about the human message, not just the threats, but the underlying logic. The humans were not crazy. They were not irrational. They simply valued different things than the Velthari did. The Dominion valued power, expansion, the accumulation of resources and territory. Survival was important, but it was important as a means to achieve these other goals. A species that survived but could not expand was considered a failure. Humans valued something else. They called it freedom, dignity, self-determination. They would rather die as themselves than live as slaves. This was not irrational. It was simply a different calculation, based on different values, and it made them incredibly dangerous. A species that feared death could be controlled through the threat of death. A species that valued survival above all else would submit when submission offered survival. But a species that accepted death, that welcomed it as preferable to submission, could not be controlled at all. They could only be destroyed, and destroying them would come at a price. The council eventually reached no consensus. Some officers advocated attack, unwilling to accept that any species could threaten the Dominion's supremacy. Others counseled withdrawal, recognizing that the cost of victory would be too high. A few suggested negotiation, though no one was certain what could be negotiated with a species that had rejected their only offer. Kethvoran dismissed the council without making a decision. He told them he would consider all perspectives and announce his orders before the ultimatum expired. Then he returned to the command bridge and stood alone before the viewing screen, watching Earth. 6 hours remained. He thought about all the worlds he had conquered, the species that had surrendered, the species that had fought and lost. He thought about the Dominion, the great empire that had dominated the galaxy for 12,000 years, and he thought about the humans. They were not the strongest species he had encountered. They were not the most advanced. By most measures, they should have been easy prey. But they were something else. Something the Velthari had never seen before. They were absolutely, completely, terrifyingly willing to die. Not because they did not value their lives. The human message had made that clear. They loved their world, their families, their existence. They wanted to survive. They wanted to continue. But they wanted to continue as themselves. And if they could not do that, if the price of survival was submission, they would choose death instead. Kethvoran had destroyed many species. He had watched civilizations burn. He had felt nothing but satisfaction at victories achieved for the glory of the Dominion. Now, for the first time, he felt something else: respect and fear. Not fear of death. He had faced death many times and did not fear it. This was something different. It was the fear of facing an enemy who could not be threatened, could not be intimidated, could not be made to submit through any means short of complete annihilation. The Dominion had always relied on fear as its primary weapon. Fear of their fleet, fear of their technology, fear of the consequences of resistance. But fear only worked on those who wanted to survive at any cost. The humans had looked at the cost and decided it was too high. They had chosen another path. Kethvoran stood on his bridge as the hours ticked away. 5, 4, 3, and slowly, quietly, he began to understand that he had already lost, not the battle. The battle had not happened yet. He had lost something more fundamental. He had lost his certainty, his belief that the Dominion could conquer anything, that no species could resist their power, that the universe belonged to the strong. The humans had shown him a different truth. Some things could not be taken by force. Some species could not be conquered. Some prey was more dangerous than the predator. 2 hours remained. Kethvoran made his decision. 1 hour remained on the ultimatum when High Admiral Kethvoran summoned his senior officers to the command bridge. They gathered quickly, their faces showing the tension that had built over the past 3 days. Some expected attack orders. Others expected negotiations. None of them expected what actually happened. Kethvoran stood before the main viewing screen, Earth glowing blue and white behind him. He looked at his officers one by one. These warriors who had served him through dozens of conquests, who had never questioned his commands, who had followed him into battles that seemed unwinnable, and emerged victorious. "I have made my decision," he said. His voice was calm, steady, certain. It was the voice of a commander who had weighed every option and found his answer. "We are withdrawing." The silence that followed was absolute. Fleet Commander Yethris stepped forward, her face showing disbelief. "High Admiral, surely you cannot mean—" "I mean exactly what I said." Kethvoran cut her off without raising his voice. "The fleet will withdraw to the edge of this system and hold position while I transmit a report to the Dominion High Council. This system is to be designated as a quarantine zone, level absolute. No Velthari vessel is to approach Earth without explicit authorization from the Council itself." "High Admiral," Weapons Master Korthak said carefully, "if we withdraw without engaging, it will be the first time in Dominion history that a target species has successfully resisted subjugation without a shot being fired." "I am aware of what it will be," Kethvoran replied. "I am also aware of what engaging this species would cost us. We have discussed the projections. We have analyzed their capabilities. We have studied their history and their psychology, and I have concluded that the cost of conquest exceeds any possible benefit." He turned to face the viewing screen, looking at Earth. "This world has nothing we need. Its resources are common throughout the galaxy. Its strategic position is irrelevant. The only reason to conquer it would be to prove that we can. And the price of that proof would be hundreds of ships, thousands of Velthari lives, and potentially the stability of the Dominion itself." Kethvoran turned back to his officers. "I will not spend Velthari blood simply to satisfy pride. We withdraw." Some of the officers looked relieved. Others looked troubled. Yethris looked furious, but she said nothing further. To openly challenge the High Admiral's decision would be insubordination, and whatever else she was. Yethris was loyal to the chain of command. "Begin withdrawal procedures," Kethvoran ordered. "Maintain defensive formations until we have cleared the system. I do not expect the humans to attack a retreating fleet, but I also did not expect them to identify our shield frequencies in 72 hours. Assume nothing." The bridge erupted into activity as officers relayed commands to the fleet. 3,000 ships began to reposition, turning away from Earth, preparing to leave the solar system they had entered, expecting easy victory. Kethvoran remained at the viewing screen, watching the planet that had defied him. He felt no anger, no frustration, no desire for revenge. He felt only a strange sense of peace. He had made the right decision. He knew this with absolute certainty. The humans had shown him something that no other species had ever shown him: a limit to Dominion power, a boundary that could not be crossed without paying a price too high to bear. This was not defeat. This was wisdom. The ability to recognize when a battle should not be fought was just as important as the ability to win battles. More important, perhaps, any fool could charge into combat. Only the wise knew when to walk away. High Admiral, Communications Officer Drethon said, "Shall I transmit a message to the humans, informing them of our withdrawal?" Kethvaran considered the question. Part of him wanted to say something to them, to acknowledge what they had accomplished, to recognize their courage and their determination. But he knew that any message would be analyzed, interpreted, and possibly misunderstood. "No," he said finally. "Let our actions speak for themselves. When our fleet withdraws, they will understand." The withdrawal took several hours. Moving 3,000 warships in coordinated formation was a complex operation, even for the Velthari. Throughout the process, Kethvaran monitored human communications, watching for any sign of attack, any indication that they intended to strike the retreating fleet. There was none. The humans watched. They tracked every ship. But they did not fire. They simply waited, weapons ready, until it became clear that the Velthari were leaving. Then, slowly, their military channels began to return to normal. The emergency frequencies went quiet. The weapons platforms that had been tracking the fleet shifted to standby mode. The people who had been preparing for extinction began to prepare for life instead. Kethvaran watched it all. He saw the celebration begin as news of the withdrawal spread across the planet. He saw humans embracing each other, weeping with relief, unable to believe that they had survived. He saw children who had been told they might not live to see another sunrise laughing and playing, unaware of how close they had come to oblivion. And he saw something else, something that troubled him. In military facilities around Earth, he saw that the humans were not simply returning to normal. They were analyzing data, studying the Velthari fleet, recording everything they had observed, learning. These humans were not going to forget what had happened. They were not going to assume they were safe. They were going to use this experience to prepare for the next threat, the next challenge, the next enemy who might arrive in their sky and demand their surrender. They were going to become stronger. As the fleet reached the edge of the human solar system, Kethvaran began composing his report to the Dominion High Council. It was the most difficult thing he had ever written. He explained the situation factually, the human capabilities, their psychological profile, the cost estimates for conquest, the risk analysis. He recommended quarantine zone designation and permanent avoidance of the Sol system. But he added something more, a warning. These humans are not like other species we have encountered. They combine primitive technology with an advanced understanding of warfare. They have survived extinction-level threats of their own making. They have developed weapons capable of destroying civilizations and have shown the willingness to use them. More importantly, they have demonstrated a characteristic I have never observed in any other species. They are completely willing to die rather than submit. Our standard subjugation protocols are based on the assumption that survival instinct will override all other considerations. This assumption does not apply to humans. I recommend that the Dominion avoid contact with this species until they have either destroyed themselves or advanced to a level where conflict would be mutually disadvantageous. Any attempt to conquer them before that point will result in losses that will significantly weaken the Dominion and encourage resistance among our existing subject species. Let me be clear. We can destroy the humans. We have the power to reduce their world to ash. But the cost of doing so would be higher than any benefit we could gain. And the consequences of that cost could threaten the stability of the Dominion itself. Some species are not worth conquering. The humans are such a species. Leave them alone. Let them fight their own wars and solve their own problems. Do not attract their attention. Do not provoke their aggression. Because if we do, if we force them to fight us with everything they have, I am not certain we will survive the encounter. And even if we do, we will never be the same. These humans are not prey. They are not cattle to be herded. They are something new, something dangerous, something that makes even the Velthari Dominion hesitate. Learn from my experience. Walk away while you still can. Kethvaran transmitted the report and watched the last of his fleet jump to faster-than-light travel, leaving the Sol system behind. On Earth, humans looked up at the sky and saw that the stars were empty once again. The alien fleet was gone. The threat had passed. They had survived. But everything had changed. In government chambers around the world, leaders began discussions that would reshape human civilization. The universe was not empty. Other species existed, powerful species with technology far beyond human capabilities. Species that might return. In military facilities, scientists and engineers began new projects, not to fight each other, but to prepare for external threats. Weapons systems were redesigned, defense networks were expanded, space programs that had been dormant for decades received new funding and new purpose. In universities and research centers, scholars began studying the alien encounter, trying to understand what they had learned, what opportunities might exist, what dangers might still await. Humanity had been changed by the encounter. They had faced extinction and had refused to accept it. They had stood against a galactic empire and had not blinked. They had proven something to themselves and to the universe. They were survivors. They were fighters. They were a species that would not surrender, would not submit, would not go quietly into the darkness, and now they knew they were not alone. The Velthari had wanted to teach humanity its place in the cosmic hierarchy. They had wanted to show these primitive creatures that the universe was ruled by the strong, that resistance was futile, that their only choice was submission or death. Instead, they had taught humanity something else entirely. They had taught them that the great powers of the galaxy could be made to fear, that an empire spanning 12 star systems could look at a single small planet and decide that conquest was not worth the cost. That determination and courage could sometimes matter more than technology and firepower. They had given humanity something precious, something that could not be taken away. Hope. Hope that when the next threat came, they would be ready. Hope that the future was not predetermined, that their fate was their own to decide. Hope that a species willing to fight, willing to sacrifice, willing to die for what it believed in could make even the mightiest empire hesitate. Years passed. Then decades. Human technology advanced. They reached out into their solar system, then beyond. They built ships that could travel between stars. They encountered other species, some friendly, some hostile. They learned and grew and changed, but they never forgot the lesson they had learned when the Velthari came to their world. Never surrender, never submit, never accept that fate is written. Fight. Always fight. Even when the odds are impossible. Even when victory seems unachievable. Even when the cost is everything. Because sometimes, if you fight hard enough, if you refuse to give up, if you make your enemies understand that destroying you will cost them more than they are willing to pay, even the greatest empires will walk away. The Velthari had come to Earth expecting prey. They had found something else entirely. They had found humanity, and they had learned to fear. Across the galaxy, in the conquered worlds of the Dominion, whispers began to spread. Stories of a small blue planet that had faced the full might of the Velthari fleet and had not surrendered. Stories of a species so dangerous, so determined, so completely unwilling to submit that even the great High Admiral Kethvoran had chosen retreat over engagement. The whispers grew. They spread from world to world, from species to species, carried by slaves and servants and the conquered peoples who had long since accepted that resistance was impossible. But now they wondered, if the humans could do it, if these primitive creatures on their insignificant planet could make the Dominion turn away, then maybe, just maybe, resistance was not as impossible as they had been taught to believe. Maybe freedom was worth fighting for after all. The Velthari had wanted to add humanity to their collection of conquered species. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous. They had created a symbol, and symbols, once created, are very hard to destroy. On Earth, humans continued their lives. They built and dreamed and fought among themselves, as they always had. But they also watched the stars now, knowing what was out there, knowing that other species existed and that some of them were not friendly. They built defenses, they developed technologies, they prepared, and they waited, because they knew, with absolute certainty, that someone would come again. Another empire, another threat, another enemy who would look at their small blue world and see easy prey. And when that day came, humanity would be ready. They would fight, they would survive, and they would teach the universe, once again, that some nightmares are better left undisturbed.